And now, as we move from Toronto and other cities far afield here to Ottawa, we're very thrilled to have the next item being the environmental panel with Councillors Moffatt and Menard. We thank you for being here. We thank you, other councillors, for being with us. I think I saw Councillors Curry, Fleury, Kavanaugh, and McKenney. Forgive me if I missed any, but thank you for joining us for these important conversations this evening. And I'm now going to pass over the mic to Gillian Koh, the chair of the Hintonburg Community Association, who will be moderating the next panel. Thank you so much. Gillian, the floor is yours.
Hi, everybody, and good evening. Nice to see everybody and so many familiar names and some faces. All right, we are very fortunate tonight to have both the chair and vice chair of the Environment Committee with us here today to tell us more about what they see ahead for our city's environment agenda. So we will have time for questions at the end of our panel. Please, just like before, use the chat to enter your questions, and we will have someone helping to filter the questions through to me, and I will pose them to our councillors. So welcome to the panelists. So first, I'll start by introducing each of them. We have Councillor Scott Moffatt. He has represented the Rito Goulburn ward since being elected in 2010, so quite some time now. Congratulations. Okay, there we go. All right. So in addition to his roles on several standing committees, Councillor Moffatt is also the chair of the Environment Committee and the co-chair of the Planning Committee for the current term. Just to be noted here that Councillor Moffatt is not seeking re-election in the upcoming municipal elections for Rito Goulburn, soon to be known as Rito Jock, for the mighty Jock River. Okay, next we have Councillor Sean Menard. He co-chairs the Environment Committee, and he has been representing the Capital Ward since being elected in 2018. He is known for being outspoken and a proponent of safe, active transportation infrastructure. He also championed the city's climate emergency declaration in 2019. Okay, so to start, I would like to invite each of you to spend about 5 minutes or so to tell us what the audience today, what you see coming up in our city's environment agenda. Okay, both the challenges and opportunities. So let's begin with Councillor Moffatt.
Great, thank you so much. I'd just like to recognize another colleague, Councillor Laura Dudas is here as well from Innes Ward, Deputy Mayor. Appreciate that so many councillors have taken the time to join us tonight, and nice to be here with CAFES and Angela, who we speak every now and then on issues, and I appreciate the constant engagement of CAFES, because I think ultimately CAFES, while we do often hear that we don't go far enough, I think CAFES has helped us get us to where we are on a lot of files, and I really appreciate that. So. And I just want to talk about that. I mean, I'm the older councillor. I think I'm the longest serving councillor in this group here. I say I'm longest serving because I got elected a few minutes before Matthew Fleury. He waited to the last ballot, and I won by a lot more. So I like to say I serve longer than him. So I'm gonna, and because I'm conservative, I'm gonna focus on the past a bit more, and I'll let Councillor Menard focus on the future part. So I'm just gonna provide an update just as to where we're at this term, because we have come a long way. It's only 3.5 years, but we've moved the yardstick quite far along, which really should set up well for the next term of council and beyond. And it's not even that far back that we have to go. January 2020 is when we approved our climate change master plan, which was unanimously approved by council. We followed that up later that year with the unanimous approval of Energy Evolution, which is the implementation plan for our climate change master plan. So everything really stems from those two important documents. A few months later, in May 2021, we launched, in collaboration with a number of groups across Ottawa, we launched Ottawa Climate Action Fund, which I'm happy to sit on the board of, the advisory board of, with Steve Winkleman as our executive director. And we also have Andrea Flowers and Steve Willis are kind of advisors to that board as well. So when we meet, I think we meet about 4 times a year or so, and we we have city staff involved in those discussions as well. So it really helps integrate, because one of the key things of energy evolution is that we have to work just outside of the city. It's not just the city that can do this alone. We have to have partners throughout various organizations in the city and levels of government, different levels of government. So OCAF's a big part of that. And in more recent months, last July, we approved the Better Homes Loan Program in collaboration with FCM. And just more recently, in October, we approved the Better Buildings Ottawa strategy. And we're currently in the process of going through the high performance development standards, which you heard briefly spoken about when we were listening to David Miller, of course, because of his role in developing the green standards in Toronto back in the early 2000s. So I think we've come quite far on these things, and it's important that we have these starting points, especially with the high performance development standards, which will be approved, I think, more than likely unanimously again by council in April. And we're working on more. There's more to come. Just in the coming months, we'll have the climate vulnerability and risk assessment come to Environment Committee. We have staff are working diligently on launching 26 new EV charging stations, with 6 more to come shortly after that. We're also sort of behind the scenes working on our plan to transition our fleet to EV as well. Obviously, the city of Ottawa, with its 17,000 employees, does have a lot of vehicles, and not many of them are currently electric. So we're developing a plan to convert those vehicles and phase that in, so that by 2030, as part of our plan, we are where we expect others to be. If we can't lead, then how can we expect others to follow? So those are sort of where we're at, and I'll just turn to Councillor Menard to speak more to what's to come and what are some of those challenges as we move forward.
Thanks, Councillor Moffatt. Nice to be here with you on a panel, and obviously very inspiring remarks from David Miller as well. Really loved his presentation, and nice to see Councillor colleagues, Councillor Curry, Councillor Kavanagh, Councillor Dudas, Councillor McKinney, Councillor Fleury here as well. Great that they're able to join us. I think one of the challenges is being really honest with residents about what it's going to take, what it's going to mean for our future. And so I talk about climate change in a very specific way. And so I repeat it in conversations and run in elections, talking about the fact that climate change is the greatest threat facing Ottawa. And I don't say that lightly. We have children living in poverty, global pandemic. There's no shortage of crisis level issues here. Medium and long term, this is the threat when it comes to flooding, when it comes to air quality, comes to climate refugees, species collapse, and when it comes to destabilization. Unless we can turn this around, and Ottawa needs to do its part in doing that and recognizing that, that is an emergency. And so appreciate my colleague Councillor Moffatt, who helped champion that climate emergency as well when it did come. And I think that challenge exists within the municipality as well. We have great frontline staff and a fantastic climate team, but we're not quite there yet in terms of our full staff complement team, all of the areas of the organization. And I think that we regularly need to think about it and incorporate those climate observations, and that needs significant improvement. I don't just mean a climate lens, but actual deference to those issues, deference to the greatest threat that we're going to face. And so the opportunities I think in front of us are many. Given what I've said about the challenges, the framing is also important. The opportunity to frame this in a positive, I think, financial light, instead of how it's normally positioned as a never-ending cost, is also one of the ways we shift the outlook on this. I've been trying to do that this term, and I know others have too, talking about the things that are no-brainers, like deep building retrofits and trying to shift our transportation demand, the electrification of our vehicles, and the generation of energy within the municipality. And the opportunities, I think, are vast. And so let me just say this term of council, though sometimes acrimonious as it has been, and some of the things that I view as deep mistakes, like the urban boundary expansion, the term has set the table. We did set the table for a potential transformation of the city on this agenda if residents want it. And I think we've done it in a few ways. The passing of the climate change master plan, the declaration of a climate emergency, as Councillor Moffatt talked about, and the continuation of energy evolution, which was no guarantee, those have set the table for investment. we passed with the will of council the concept of a revolving fund that can be set up in perpetuity, so that savings we achieve from energy efficiency, climate investments can then be reinvested for more retrofits. The significant work on the solid waste master plan, you heard David Miller talk about that as one of the key pillars. That could be a plan for significant diversion of organics from landfill and significant reduction in our emissions if we fulfill it next term of council. And I think we've passed a motion that tasks our staff with divestment from the fossil fuel industry. They're looking into that now and how we can get there with the help of CAFES and others, and the commitment to future purchase of a significant amount of e-buses. So I think all these things have really set the table. And so it's now what we need is action and the follow through to get those things done.
Thank you, councillors. Just Councillor Menard, one follow-up question. When you say that we're not quite there yet, what do you think is the one or two best ways that we could get Ottawa there?
I think one of the biggest ways is going to be, this next October, this next term of council is who are we bringing in to help us push towards those things? If residents are showing their councillors or their potential officials who are running for council that climate is important to them, that trees are important to them, that they're going to vote based on issues of, urban boundary expansion and transportation, those are things that really would help us get there. So this is the year to get engaged. I also think we're going to see a lot of turnover as well, right? Within our teams, climate change and the activism around climate change has been ongoing for a long time, but the critical mass that exists now is greater than at any time, and it needs to be. And so I think that is something that has, we'll see a natural turnover of people who believe in this, want to take action on this within both our staff team, and if we make it happen within the election as well.
Thank you. And I'll just reiterate from David's point previously, one of the questions asked was, well, how do we get our city there? And he said, we have an election coming up. We've heard it from Councillor Menard also. Ensure our next mayor and councillors are climate leaders. All right. So now I'm just going to pose a few questions to you, and we'll just alternate you both having a chance to answer. Okay, we did just have reference to the climate emergency. So let's look back through the term. It's been 3 years since the city has declared a climate emergency. Do you think the city's actions and commitments made are sufficient to address the current climate emergency? We can start with Councillor Moffatt.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a question that my assumption would be the majority of people on this call don't think we've gone far enough, and I recognize that. And I'm a realist. That's probably one of my weaknesses. To bold things, that I'm a realist, and I know that we have challenges with making certain decisions and going.
Nothing wrong with that, friend.
Going to where we need to be on files. And I was on with a group from Lisgar Collegiate, a group of students talking about housing and homelessness, and say that one of the challenges we have is that we fund so many things, but we never fund them to the degree that they need funding. So when it comes to social services, we sprinkle money across so many different pots so that we can say that we've done these things. But in reality, if we actually stopped funding some things and funded to a higher degree the things that we've considered are the real priorities, which are housing and homelessness, then we would actually move the needle on those elements. But instead, in order to satisfy so many groups, or more or less placate so many groups, we end up not moving the needle at all in those files. And I think that's one of the challenges we have here with climate change too. Now, this is obviously a more, we've been funding social services programs for ages, and we haven't been funding climate change initiatives for the same amount of time. So it's a bit more recent as to what that issue we have. But even this term, there's no actual line item in the budget that's specific for climate initiatives like energy evolution. And we do fund things that when we do transition, when we do new buses, when we do retrofits and new buildings, we look to a better standard as we move along. You won't necessarily find those as line items in the budget, but all we've been able to do so far this term is just take the dividend surplus, which isn't guaranteed. And even then, every single year, we've had to sort of behind the scenes do a little bit of scratching and clawing to make sure that it's not taken away from us. The next term, and I hope it gets discussed through the campaign, not just by advocates like yourselves, but actually by candidates for mayor and for council, is they actually think of ways to use our budget to realign it to fit energy evolution. You know, one thing is the full hydro dividend, which is $20 million annually. But if a candidate promises that, you have to ask them where they're filling in the space that they took from. And that's the key thing, is you can't just promise that you're going to take money and put it somewhere. You have to say, where else are you filling the holes from what you took from? And that's kind of the bigger struggle. That's where the money should go. The dividend surplus should the entire dividend, should go to energy evolution, because that's where it fits best. But then you have to look at the budget and say, where do you fill the $20 million hole from?
Thank you, Councillor Moffatt. Councillor Menard?
Well, I guess, I mean, the simple answer for me is no, it hasn't been sufficient on the actions and the strict commitments. That said, I'll go back to previous comments. I think we've set the table for next term. If we want this can happen. It's going to take some bold leadership, as David Miller talked about. You know, so I think where we've succeeded is around things like the zero emission buses, the LRT extension with the ability to move it to electric on the north-south. Council's made strides on the organization, so our kind of corporate transportation side. Where I think we've not succeeded, or we need advancement, is inducing the type of citywide demand on the transportation side. We are very much in love with roads, road widening. You know, we know this isn't very effective. We're behind a lot of other cities when it comes to our building strategy. We're not retrofitting as much as we can right now in the deep retrofits of our own corporate buildings. We're just getting started now in the community sort of retrofits with some of those incentivization programs, which I think we need a lot more of. You know, I've talked about the urban boundary expansion. I don't need to go too much into that today, but I don't think that's going to meet our, you know, the goals that we want to try to set with density and achieving our climate goals. The city fleet, not just the transportation transit side, but our fleet itself. We need to move that to be fully electric. We need to really be moving on power generation through solar and wind on municipal lands. I think we're going to begin, I hope, incentivizing more district energy systems, those heating and cooling systems, those air source heat pumps. And I think if you want to be bold and attract more tourists and be an innovative city, you need to look at what other cities are doing around things like free transit and car-free zones and reducing that road expansion, parking and congestion rates. These are things that, as an innovative city, will attract people and bring in a kind of new urbanism that I think Ottawa is really in desperate need of. Maybe it hasn't been ready for, but I think we're getting there. And so there's a lot to look forward to if we have that kind of bold leadership. But certainly the actions around funding some of that plan is going to be, you know, critical in the next term of council.
Thank you, Councillor Menard, and also thank you for highlighting things we can look forward to and some ideas of what we should be doing going forward. Just to both of you, we're talking about the budget and how much money we have to spend on all of these initiatives. David Miller also talked about something they did in Toronto called Live Green Toronto, and this is specific money set for community projects for climate action and sustainability within communities. This is something for low income neighborhoods, with the understanding that higher income neighborhoods would take this on themselves. Would you see something like that being implemented in Ottawa, or would you support it? Either of you?
Sorry, can you just repeat that?
Sure. So
I was also reading the chat. I'll close.
It's a little much with
chat.
both going on at the same time. No problem. Okay, so Toronto has Live Green Toronto. This is a small grant program for community-based projects for communities and neighborhoods themselves to address climate change on a local level. This is something specifically for low income neighborhoods, with the understanding that higher income neighborhoods are more inclined to take on these initiatives on their own, or are not as affected based on the community. So would you support something like this, or would you foresee something like this being implemented in Ottawa, just as we're already talking about budgets and how it's hard to find the money for all of these activities?
Yeah, I mean, we do have an environmental grant program. I'm not sure if the parameters fit. It's often used for community building projects and whatnot, but we do have that grant program that does exist for anyone to apply. I do see the point about the benefit being exclusive for lower income communities that couldn't afford these types of projects otherwise. I think too, when you look at the funding that we do have for our climate resiliency group, they often use that to leverage opportunity. So we actually are the ones that usually use our money to go out and get grants from elsewhere, rather than giving grants to our communities. But in that, I don't see any reason why we couldn't somehow partner with another group. Certainly, that's the whole intent of OCAF, is building partnerships and bringing in funds to look at positive change in communities and working with communities like this. So I think that's a program that would likely fit well within Ottawa if we could just fit it within the existing framework of what we do with our climate resilience group.
You want me to add?
Okay.
I think that was a good answer.
All right, yeah. You don't have to add unless you want, unless there's something else to be added.
I was just going to mention that I'll mention what David Miller had presented. I think Councillor Moffatt answered that question very well, but other pieces he was mentioning around green space and taking that park space instead of the cash. That's something very much our new official plan has envisioned, and our parks plan has talked about as well, is taking green space instead of the cash in lieu. Being bold in our design standards, I agree. I think we need to be more bold than what we've passed so far, and I think council's going to get there. And then we need to really push that hard in the next several years to scale that up to where other cities are at. And he talked about density and green density. I like this, but I think there's a recognition density doesn't lead to affordable housing, right? You need both. You need public ownership, I think, in some cases, as he was talking about. These are ideas that, again, set the city ahead, make it a destination city for people that want to move here and innovate. And I think those are some of the pieces that, the green space, I think we're getting there. But a lot of other, bold actions needed on some of those other pieces he had mentioned.
Thank you, Councillor Menard. Councillor Moffatt, not last question, but one question specifically for you. As this is your last term, what advice do you have for the next Environment Committee?
It's a good question. I don't often think about that, but I think support our team. But one thing, I mean, we need councillors that support the teams that we have, and our staff is incredible. I think Janice Ashworth is actually on this call, but our team in the climate group is phenomenal, and the work they do. I think I mentioned the vulnerability assessment. Julie Robinson's leading that. We have Melissa Jorah-Conway, who was sort of embedded into the official plan development from the climate team. She formerly worked within the planning group on files, but having them all collaborate across all sectors of the city is key. Obviously building on that and continuing to grow that group is paramount for the next Environment Committee. There's a lot to do. I mean, there's the climate change. There's the climate change master plan is one thing, where solid waste master plan is coming to the next committee of the environment as well. One of the first decisions they'll make next term is approving the solid waste master plan. And there's a lot in that plan that focuses on climate and where we can go, but there's going to be difficult decisions in that plan. The intent is that we will hand it to that council ready to go. They'll have to make those decisions whether or not to implement those things. And there's a lot in there that people don't like. And some of the decisions we make aren't always about satisfying the majority. Some of the decisions we make are about what happens in this city 20, 30 years from now. I've never tried to do my job thinking about what gets me to the next election, but what is the best for my community well beyond when I'm gone. And one thing for me has always been on the solid waste side is that landfill is in the ward I represent. And I don't know a single community in rural Ottawa that wants to see another landfill. But we also have this juxtaposition about, waste to energy, and now recently this conversation about shipping our waste to our municipality, which I don't agree with. I believe that we should solve our waste problems that we create. We shouldn't just pass it off to our municipality somewhere nearby. So that's going to be one of the biggest decisions at the next term, right at the start. So I think it's, don't be afraid to lead. Especially first-term councillors. First-term councillors, it's very easy to sort of get scared about losing the next election because you've never run for re-election before. It's a lot easier to be bold after you've been re-elected once. But it's going to be incredibly important for whoever sits on the next environment committee to make bold decisions on the solid waste master plan, and then to continue to push energy evolution and find funding for it. One of the biggest things that needs to be advocated for is for the federal and provincial governments to look at municipalities and look at their master plans on climate change and fund them. I don't need the federal government to do their own climate change plans. I need them to look at ours, look at Edmonton's, look at Vancouver's, and fund them. We're the ones that can do the most when it comes to transportation and buildings on the ground, which is the two biggest sucks of energy and the two biggest contributors to greenhouse gas emissions. We have our plans. We need them funded. So instead of other levels of government wasting their time on planning and creating documents and reports and studies, fund municipalities to make the difference.
Thank you. All right, so let's look for new funding from the federal government direct to the cities for our own climate change plans. All right, I'm going to just ask one more question before we switch over to questions from the audience. So we know that we need at least a 40% canopy coverage to combat climate change. And the benefits of trees are numerous, physically, mentally. So as you're both on the planning committee, what sort of changes and measures do you envision could be done to address the growing and preserving our urban tree canopy in the face of development?
I can start. So we need to recognize where we are. We've just passed a new urban tree bylaw that's taking effect, that staff are analyzing now. It's unfortunate because you see all the trees coming down in your inbox now, which is important. But it's unfortunate to see it happening as it goes on. There's a lot of trees that are taken down and we're not replacing them fast enough. And it's happening for a variety of reasons. But the biggest thing I'll just mention is that we need to measure this properly and immediately at the very, very kind of micro neighborhood level. And it shouldn't wait. We have the ability to do this. We know that the tree canopy study that was carried out in 2017 was under the direction of the city. It was with a third-year environmental studies student, and it was part of a 70-hour practicum placement. And it was done to assess the effectiveness of the 2009 urban tree conservation bylaw at preventing the loss of urban canopy cover. And so it studied 5 urban neighborhoods between 2008 and 2017, and it used 6-centimeter aerial photography for those years and classified those segments as tree or non-tree. It was done under the tutorship of city staff. And so for each lost tree, the researcher assessed whether the loss occurred because of infill, because of a visual analysis of changes to the surrounding buildings and landscape, and then the results of the analysis then were compiled, and it suggested a substantial loss of trees in all of those neighborhoods since the implementation of that urban tree conservation bylaw in 2009. And so we were talking about like significant losses over those period of years, from 37 to 59%, depending on the area. Infill development was responsible for a lot of that tree removal, depending on the neighborhood. But there were another variety of reasons. And so this is really tough. We cannot afford to lose our tree canopy. We need to measure what we've got, because measurement means that there'll be action that takes place afterwards. And so there was a commitment recently just emailed to me from city staff that CAFES can do. CAFES can replicate, I think in concert with the city, working with the city, a lot of the work using more of the current aerial photography. City staff have committed to providing shape files or Google Earth files of the sample points and the neighborhood boundaries that were used in that study. So we can replicate that study. And we need to do this sort of thing, because when we show the amount of loss that we're seeing in our trees, or tree cover, people will be alarmed and start to take action. And so that's one way we need to move. The other one I'll just mention really quickly is we need to extend the new tree bylaw. The urban guidelines should apply to the suburban areas as well, in terms of a 30 centimeter diameter at breast height, constituting a distinctive tree, instead of the 50 centimeters. There's a number of other pieces of action that need to take place, but it's tough because we just passed this bylaw. It's just there now. So we need to give it at least a little bit of time to see how it plays out. And staff are seeing some wins from it. They're seeing trees saved that would not have been saved before in some of that infill. And so there are some wins that have come with it and the funding mechanisms, but there's much more options that we need to implement here that I think other cities have been a good example of. I can leave it there.
Yeah, I don't have much to add to that. I mean, I think we've only just started to put the right legislation in place, like the urban forest management plan and the new tree protection bylaw, the site alteration bylaw, which was put in place back in 2018. I think we have an update coming to ERAC on that as well. So that's only just started, but I think, how do we balance the protection of trees with all the intensification that's to come? That's going to be one of the toughest challenges that we have.
And just while we're talking about tree canopy, David Miller talked a lot about how we cannot address climate change without having social justice. Is there room, is there room for the city to look at our canopy coverage and our aims for 40% and make this by a per neighborhood basis rather than 40% of the city, which includes the NCC property?
Our new official plan does have the neighborhood.
But is it 40% tree canopy coverage by neighborhood?
Yeah, if I'm not mistaken, that's what we did at the end. I'm getting a lot of head shakes. There was a motion, the original one that came forward, the draft was still at the ward level, but we did move to a neighborhood level during the discussion and approval back in October.
Yeah, the key to that is the follow through. That Councillor Moffatt's right. We did go there thanks to Councillor Brockett and Councillor McKenney, who pushed a lot on that, the tree bylaw previously. The key is us following through on that and the measurement that's going to take place. We're going to have a kind of larger global measurement that'll take place soon, but there's a real need for some, I think, assistance at that very local level, how that's going to happen, because all communities are not created equal in terms of their tree canopy. We definitely have a disparity depending on which ward it is, and that there is a lot of research that has gone into social justice and tree growth, tree canopy in areas that are traditionally not as equitably served, and so I think this is certainly a conversation for Ottawa. We need to see much more tree retention. And the replanting, sometimes we always say, oh, we'll replant 2 trees for the one we take down. But the research and studies show that that's not sufficient. You're not going to replace that 100-year-old tree in terms of its carbon sequestration and its benefits for that community with just a replanting of a couple of trees. So the protection of our canopy is extremely important. I know I see other councillors on this call have done a lot of work on this, more than I have, like Councillor McKenney that's there. So you may want to ask them to speak, but I I think there's not much more that needs to be done on that side of things. The official plan has taken the right step in being aspirational there after pressure from the community and POP, but we're going to have follow through on those neighborhood level targets.
Okay, thank you.
Jillian, before just a gentle reminder, we have 5 minutes left in this portion
Okay.
of the program. So one last question.
All right, thank you. Oh, just one last question. Oh boy. All right, so I'll just go with this one regarding the high performance development standard. So the question was, why is Ottawa's high performance development standard inferior to Toronto's in all except one area?
I can answer. I mean, Sean agrees with that question, and if it was Sean asking it, I'm not surprised. But when we talked about this at planning committee, it still goes to Technical Social Affairs Committee on April 7th. But we also have a motion from Councillor Menard that's being looked at to come back to try to move the needle on some of the things. But it's our starting point is further along than what Toronto's starting point was, but this is our starting point, and it's the intent is, like we've done with other things, it's a balanced approach. It's not exactly where maybe the industry wants us to be, and it's not where the advocacy groups want us to be, but we try to balance it. I don't necessarily think it's about finding a sweet spot. I think it's about finding a starting point, and this is something that will constantly evolve, and we'll keep on coming back to it and moving it along. But as David Miller said, it's important to start with something that's achievable and that you can get done and actually see progress and see results. That's where I feel that we've started. I feel our staff believe that's where we've started, and I supported that. I mean, I think Councillor Menard has like I said, he has a motion that's coming forward that's going to alter a few things and make it maybe make it a bit better. But I think it's important that we start here and we continue to work toward building that, just as Toronto's done. I mean, Toronto's on their 4th phase of their high performance development standards. Ottawa will be at some point too.
Okay. Thank you, Councillor Moffatt, and thank you, Councillor Menard, for your time today. Okay, so I think some of the main things we need to think of going forward, just to summarize what we've heard from both councillors today, we're looking for bold leadership. We have an election coming up. We can look for those climate leaders, and we need to think about what the city is doing and how we can just get that funding from the federal, provincial government, as Councillor Moffatt said, rather than them making their own plans. So let's focus on how we can get these actions made at municipal level actually moving. And as Councillor Menard said, we've got these things in place, and let's see the follow through and implementation. So I think those are the biggest points we have that were highlighted out to me, is just how we can implement this and where it's going forward. And thank you for all of your time today for both of you. Thank you for your work on the Environment Committee, and we look forward to more collaboration with you and the new Environment Committee in the coming term. So I'm going to pass it over to Chair Liz Bernstein now. Thank you for your time.
Thank you so much, Gillian, and thank you, Councillors Moffatt and Menard, and all of you for the excellent questions and contributing to the conversation this evening. And I did want to thank, in addition to Councillors Moffatt and Menard, once again, Councillors Curry, Dudas, Fleury, Kavanagh, and McKenney for being with us here tonight. The city staff who are with us here tonight, we know you also work very hard on these issues, and all of you from the communities and from various organizations across the city working together with us. We've heard from councillors and David Miller that there are big challenges and also big opportunities ahead of us in this very critical year of municipal and provincial elections, where we really do want to see Ottawa, the capital of Canada, stepping up. And so that is what CAFES is all about, local action.